Now to another big cultural moment. It's actually tomorrow's federal budget, because don't get these things wrong, because they're not just really about, the dollars and the cents and how they all add up. It's also about how we're meant to live. For instance, should we be pampering ourselves, or should we have something in the budget that encourages us to work? And plus, of course, there's a big one right now. How fair is it that this generation keeps borrowing massively from their children, with the national debt rocketing now towards $1 trillion? $1 trillion. Joining me to discuss what vision, if any, is behind tomorrow's budget, as far as we can tell right now, is business editor Ross Greenwood, who's also host of Business Now, weekdays on Sky News. Ross Greenwood, debt rocking up to $1 trillion. We've got low productivity, and inflation is taking off around the world. Now, with all these challenges, are you expecting, from the leaks we know so far, anything that tells you that this budget is going to prepare this country for a future that's actually looking pretty ominous?
There is no budget repair that's going to take place. Both political parties have indicated that. Both have said that their way of being able to repair the budget is to effectively have the economy grow faster than what they can spend money. So this is a little bit like you taking the view with your own household budget, that your idea of being able to get ahead in life is to be able to make more money than you can spend, and to be able to keep doing that during your whole life. Now, not bad if you can do it, not so good if you can't. And so the important aspect of this is, as you mentioned, with gross debt of more than $1 trillion, the question about what happens to future governments when interest rates rise, and they're rising fast right now. And so as a result, in the future, interest payments are going to gobble up more of the budget. But the trick is right now, the government, right as we sit here, is awash with cash. Notwithstanding the debt, the interest rates are low. It's got more people employed than ever in history in Australia. Half of that money, of PAYE taxpayers' money, is the government's funding for the year. And on top of that, it's also got booming commodity prices. It's wheat, it's coal, it's gas, it's iron ore. It's all of those things which really are providing an enormous bonus for the government, which will make it very difficult not to spend some of that money in this budget, notwithstanding you'll be preaching prudence all the way through.
Well, to clarify for viewers, you're saying they're awash with cash. That's given what they expected to get. Of course, we've got this monster debt in the meantime. So what you're saying is, because, well, it's an election year, the election's less than 2 months away, they're going to spend that money rather than repay debt. But then, is that the right priority?
Well, there's an interesting thing about this. You know that interest rates, and households will have felt this, businesses have felt it as well. Despite the massive increase in debt that the government took on during the coronavirus recession, it meant that their interest payments last year were lower than what they were pre-pandemic. And the reason is because interest rates were so close to zero. Now, the real problem, though, is not today. It's in the future. Interest rates around the world are rising fast. So to give you one small example, the Reserve Bank for almost 18 months protected what's known as the 3-year government bond yield. They kept that yield or interest rate at 0.07% until June last year. They effectively stopped defending it. Well, that rate today is sitting above 2.3%. It's risen more than 30 times since then. So that's where you see the real cost of living rising, the real cost of debt rising. And so it is inevitable, as in the future new government bond issuances actually roll off and need to be refinanced, that the debts of Australia will start to bite because the interest payments will rise. That is inevitable. And that's the reason why governments today have to be more prudent. But I can tell you one other thing, Andrew, and that is I believe you can actually tell whether the government's given up on this election, whether they believe that Scott Morrison has no chance of winning. If they put in their spending measures that go out into the next 4 to 10 years that really maybe a future Labor government has to deal with, then they've pretty much given up on the election and given up on Scott Morrison. If, however, they preach the prudence line, they don't put in new measures, only short-term spending measures, you see that they think that they've got a chance of winning this election.
The first option you suggested is where they plant landmines in future budgets, so the Labor government have to cut, and then they
precisely. That's exactly what I'm thinking. Exactly,
That's
Andrew.
exactly very cunning. I'm going to look out for that one. Cost of living, you mentioned, huge issue. Fuel prices up, food prices also rising, house prices in the city out of reach for a lot of people. What do you think is going to be done about that? We're already hear leaks about a temporary cut in the fuel excise, 10, 20 cents a litre for a start. No cut in beer excise, at least, I believe. What are you hearing?
So it is the cut in the excise. It's things such as the first home buyer scheme that the government created to get 60,000 people, new home buyers, into their homes. This allows people with just a 5% deposit to be able to go out there and get the government to provide the extra 15% or to borrow it from the government, and as a result get a 20% deposit so they can go and buy homes. They're going to extend that scheme and allow more people to get into their homes. But the interesting side about this, Andrew, I just get a little worried. I mean, I'm very conservative about these types of matters, and that is that I worry about people who get into significant debts to buy into housing markets that have already risen in capital cities 25% over the past 12 months. I worry when I see interest rates rising, and with our Reserve Bank behind the curve and behind where they are in other parts of the world. That remember that the US Federal Reserve has indicated that there's another 6 interest rate rises coming as they try and head off inflation. At some point, we'll have to deal with the same thing here in Australia, and it just worries me, significantly worries me about people and businesses getting into massive amounts of debt that in the future they, like the government, will have to deal with higher interest rates. And I just see some parallels, I've got to say, in the period between 1987 and 1991 when our last great recession hit. And it just really does worry me that in many cases, though the interest rates might be lower than they were then, the amount of debt that people and businesses have taken on is much, much higher. And I've got to say, I just hope that the Reserve Bank and the government know what they're doing.
Absolutely correct. Good warning. Ross Greenwood, thank you for your time.